Hey, howdy, and welcome, kids. It is time once again for Conscious Embodiment, Astrology, and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. I am here as I am every Sunday night at midnight into Monday, which is the exact moment of the new moon. I'm here with Zoe. Hey, Zoe. Happy new moon.
Happy new moon.
Happy end of the eclipse season and the beginning of the new lunar cycle. Yay.
Absolutely. Congratulations
And that's
to
really,
everyone.
Yes, right? We made it. We got through. And I do also love that the new moon was literally at 12:27 a.m. today, Monday, Pacific time, right? So that means that as the C-mail was going out announcing this week's podcast, the moon was new in Scorpio. We are in a new lunar cycle. In a little bit later segment, I will break down everything about this new moon. I know we talked about it a little bit last week's podcast, and that's what we'll be talking about today. But I first want to start with a question, and it's a question I get asked a lot that I don't generally answer, and I'm going to use the extra time today to talk a little bit about the violence on the planet, the immediate future, how astrology is or may not be, is reflecting this. So let's take a little bit of a deep dive. So I get asked a lot on social media, mostly, what comment on, the war in Israel and Gaza through the lens of astrology, or what about all of the violence here and there? Like, what's going to happen next? I don't do that with astrology much. Like, I'm very limited in how I use astrology. And so how I present astrology is in alignment with how I use it as a tool. So I use it as a tool on how to navigate a Tuesday so that you have a reflection of the energy that we're working with that allows us to understand things that we might not be able to understand, or that baffle us, or that trouble us. And then using astrology as a contextualizing tool. I don't feel insane. I know when to just let difficult moments live and know that they'll pass, and I can use astrology to sort of guide when they will pass. Like my pal Monique and I talk about every third morning about things that are making us feel crazy, but using astrology to contextualize those things so that we don't, in fact, feel crazy. We recognize that everything is energy. The moving energy is described by astrology, and we can use that to have a more grounded and powerful experience of your day-to-day life. So you'll have a terrorist attack, or a war start, or a big loss in the world of celebrity, and people will ask me to reflect such things through the lens of astrology, and I just don't do that. So I don't present it out into the world. But we are living in a wild moment, and there's a lot of terrifying things happening on the planet. And I think that's one of the reasons why people will ask such questions.
They want guidance.
And they want guidance. They want something. And I got to tell you, I'm not sure what I'm going to say, but I'm going to read a question that came to me that's all about this. And I'm going to just see what comes when I start talking about it. Okay? So the question, of course, will contextualize all of this. If you're not quite getting what I mean, Devon's question will outline. So Devon is who wrote in. Devon writes, "Hi, Dr. Michael Lennox. I just wanted to start off by saying I've been following the weekly podcast and your daily astro updates for some time. I find your insight and outlook very helpful to me to understand the events and circumstances going on in my personal life and on a much larger scale to world events. Recently, there has been a lot of conflict and violence. Yes, there has. Specifically, I am referring to the conflict between Palestine and Israel. Then on Thursday, October 26th, there was also a mass shooting that occurred in Lewiston, Maine, making national news. This is just 5 minutes from my dad's house. Ouch, that's very close to home. I am an ICU nurse at a hospital in Connecticut and was informed that over the past weekend, my friend and coworker's mom, also a psych nurse, was brutally murdered during a home visit. Oh, God. With all the violence and conflict and mental health stuff, I'm genuinely curious your opinion and outlook on the transits that are causing these kinds of events. It seems like the world has gotten much more violent and dangerous over the last few months, and was wondering what transits are affecting us and if there's any way out of it soon. Thank you for your time. Regards. First of all, I think I love the way that Devon phrased the question. Like, I didn't feel like I was being asked to go into waters that I don't want to dwell in. Somehow this felt very inviting to me to talk a little bit about some stuff. I'm going to nitpick a few things, Devon. This isn't personal, because everybody, you're not the only one who will say, like, what's causing this? And I want to make sure that I always correct that. The planets do not cause anything, but they directly reflect what's happening with the collective. Okay? The other thing I want to address is one of the last things that Devon said, which is if there is any way out of it soon. And the answer to that is no, unless 5 years seems soon. Right? Because things are only heating up. And that's another reason why I get sensitive about how much I share about some of these thoughts and perspectives I have about now and Pluto changing signs, because that's what's behind this. And Uranus changing signs soon, as well as Neptune. There's a lot of big planets changing signs. And that's part of what we're seeing out there in the world, is this kind of changes that happen on the planet in a kind of generational way that is driven by and amplified by big planets changing signs. Also, astrology describes energy, and we use that energy differently in different contexts, right? So if there are transits that are reflecting a violent act that happens out there in the world, that same transit, if it had happened, in another decade where the world wasn't so violent, it wouldn't have been a violent act that the transit would have reflected. Right? The transits don't make what happens. The generational consciousness is a big part of this. And we are in a warring, breaking down, culminating, difficult passage outside of the astrology. That's what the world is doing. I think one of the reasons why I felt like this was a good time to answer this question, besides the fact that I have the time, I guess, today, because there's not a huge amount of stuff happening this week, is I saw a video out there, probably on TikTok, that I have seen before, a teaching that I'm aware of outside of TikTok, which is that historians will look at the flow of history in these 20-year blocks, in these 80-year cycles that we in the United States have gone through over and over and over again, where you have like 20 years of thriving, 20 years of like creativity, 20 years of innovation, and then 20 years of falling apart. Those two middle blocks that I named as creativity and innovation, I'm making that up. I'm paraphrasing like crazy, right? So don't hold
And
me
are
to
we
task.
in this 20 of falling apart?
Yes, we are in fact, so what got me was the history folk were saying that in the United States, we are entering the final four, like there's the the final one of this that started with the thriving in the United States post-World War II, right? So the 50s and the 60s with the thriving, the sort of, after the 60s and the revolutions there, the 70s and the 80s were one thing, 80s and 9. So here we are in the last throes, which they declared as beginning, like the 20-year fall apart began with the recession in 2008. the housing market blowing up, the banks blowing up. And that's when Pluto moved into Capricorn. That was a direct astrological reflection of breaking downs of structure. Capricorn is rule structure. Pluto is the death planet. So, like astrologers, we all saw it coming, and there it was. Now, if that's the beginning of a 20-year period of fall apart, I think that's interesting because that matches Pluto's cycle. Pluto spends about 20 years in each sign. So if you think of 2008 and the recession as a beginning of a 20-year block of falling apart, that means that we still have another 5 years within that. Right now, we're not talking about Pluto. It happens to be that the beginning of this period that some historian has marked as the recession of 2008 also reflected Pluto. And that made me think about Pluto's 20-year cycle and generations that also follow Pluto's movement, that each of these 20 years is also reflecting a new generation of folks who will actually, and they identified some things about like who's going to save the day. And it ain't me, I'm on my way out. Like I'm in the, this is my last 20 years. Okay, so Pluto changing signs is the beginning of the sort of destruction between the old Capricornian things that fell apart, like banking and housing, and then moving into technology, technology expanding, the presence of AI, and all of the Aquarian elements. And certainly if World War III is coming, it's going to include lots of attacks on the internet and connectivity. And, you want to fuck up the United States, take us out of our internet. And I'm sure there's lots of, terrorists trying to do that on a daily basis. So you've got Neptune getting ready to leave Pisces and move into Aries in 2025, where religiosity and spiritual connection of Neptune goes into the sign of war. And shortly after that, Uranus moves into Gemini, trining Pluto in Aquarius, air to air, which signals even more potential breakdowns and destruction where fast change and slow change are harmonizing, where Pluto is slow, Uranus is fast. In 2026, they'll trine each other. Like, there's a lot coming on the planet that is reflecting these large planets getting ready to leave signs and enter new signs. Those are major ingresses, and they signal big shifts in the psyche of the collective. I'd also add and throw in there that Pluto squaring the nodes of the moon that peaked this past July also signals a moment where death, destruction, and the rebirth that can follow, which is all a Pluto consciousness, is sort of brutally ending the old world, Pluto square south node, while with challenge and difficulty helping us create and build a new world, Pluto square north node. That's not an easy reconstruction. We're smack dab in the middle of this. And when I was talking about this specific Pluto squaring of the nodes, what I said several times, and I'm saying it here again, that marked the month of July as being intense. That also marked the year of 2023 being intense for radical change that comes through difficulty, conflict, and obstacle. But that this would also have an influence on the decade ahead and the decade behind us. That this year is like the peak of now I'm adding the astrological and that historical. I think that 2023 marks the peak of the destructiveness of this sort of 20-year breakdown cycle, after which we get another rebirth. Right? Remember, the 20-year cycle of breakdowniness doesn't just end the world, although I guess that's what a lot of people are frightened will happen. And I don't believe that. I believe in the resilience of the human race. I believe in the arc towards good. I believe that every dark, patriarchal, colonizing, and misogynistic energy that is rearing up, looking like it might take over, is an extinction grab. The old world is dying. The new world is being born by people who are doing deep work on their consciousness. And the old ways will do their best to hold on to power. And in that fight, we're going to see more difficulty, more violence, especially in the United States. It's not going away. There is no way out of this but through.
Oh my God.
And so I finish with the only thing I can ever say to anybody about how I get through such ideas and therefore hopefully inspire others, which is we're all at war inside our own hearts. That's why there's war on the outside, because there's so many people on the planet that hold that war as an inner consciousness. It cannot help but be reflected out there. I know a lot of the people who are liberal leaning in the United States of America think that the problem is the other side, and the problem is not the other side. The problem is the divide. The problem is the polarity. And so if you're a fabulous liberal, but you're still screaming at the other side, you're part of the problem. Now, I don't know how to do the other, so I don't have a solution to that particular problem, except that I believe that when more people on the planet have less war in their own hearts, we will see less war in the outer landscape. And since I don't know how to be an activist to solve problems in the Middle East, but I do know how to help individuals bring peace to their hearts, and I believe in this power of the collective, I will continue to shout to the rooftops. What to do is, A, become the activist that you are born to be. And if that means shouting out loud in the streets and protesting and doing stuff, have at it. But make sure you're also doing your inner work to calm the wars in our hearts so that we can create a world where peace for humanity is possible at long last. But it ain't going to happen anytime soon, and we've got some mighty years of difficulty to get through, and I believe in our resilient power to do so. You know, in a new moon in Scorpio, one of the intentions we can be setting is to be able and willing to move through really deep, dark, scary material with more grace and ease. Because if there's one sign of the 12 of the zodiac that's most comfortable with death and destruction, it's going to be Scorpio.
Right.
Scorpio understands that death is followed by rebirth. There is no fear of death in the Scorpio mansion. In this regard, death and change are synonymous. And so we certainly want to set intentions at this time for courageous meeting of the world on its own terms, right? So this is an unplanned sort of, segue between the last segment where I talked about violence and war not going anywhere for a couple of years, and now we are actually in a new moon that will allow all of us to sort of say, okay, if the world's going to go crazy, please allow me to find within myself the consciousness that can perceive it through the lens of love. Little nod there for a intention for acceptance of the mighty changes and transformations that are happening on the planet. Both Mars and Mercury are conjunct this new moon, so our embodiment receives the intentions we set like a direct download. And the mind is nearby, but in a different sign. Now, Mercury's really not close enough to be conjunct. I'm sort of adding that in to make a sort of point that having Mercury near the new moon, but in the sign of higher truth, Sagittarius, we get to have, we get to grab like higher consciousness thoughts as part of the new moon intentions that we set. But again, the presence of Mars with the new moon, I like archetypally because it kind of says that if I set an intention in the energy of yesterday, today, and even a little bit tomorrow, my body is listening. Now, all of them, moon, sun, moon, and Mars, are directly and exactly opposing Uranus today. First of all, that's making yesterday, today, and tomorrow filled with the possibility of anything can happen and probably will. That Uranus is the sudden and the unexpected. Mars is how we physically move through our world. And an opposition is an dynamic energy that cannot be avoided, right? So, move slow, drive slow. If it's not too late, if you're here, whenever you're hearing this, if you're hearing this on Sunday night or Monday or even Tuesday, fasten your seatbelt. There's a beautiful trine between the new moon and Neptune, the holder of spirit. So we are, in fact, very dialed into our higher guidance system with this new moon. That's going to feel yummy yesterday, today, and tomorrow, because both the sun and Mars will inch towards perfecting that trine this week. So that's things that occur, like in the week ahead, that are, in and of themselves, they're not like outrageous, powerful transits, but it is interesting that if we set an intention today in the new moon consciousness, and I'm telling you that Sun and Mars are trining Neptune, in terms of your new moon experience, that means we're dialed in directly to spirit. But then what happens as the week progresses, we get to like the 16th, which is like Thursday, so Wednesday, Thursday into Friday, both Mars and the sun will be trining Neptune. So what that sets us up is all week we're very dialed into our connection to spirit, which, by the way, is also the only thing that's going to save us at the individual level when we're trying to, grapple with a world that's gone mad, is that we got to turn within and find our strength in our connection to powers that are greater than us. And that's going to be easy to do this week. So remember that square from Pluto to the nodes of the moon that peaked in July. Well, the nodes move slowly, and so does Pluto, which means that Pluto is still squaring the nodes of the moon. And in this new moon, the orb of influence between where Pluto is and where the nodes are is only 3 degrees, three and change. That means it's tight. Like the smaller the orb, the more exact and powerful the geometry is. So the nodes are at almost 25 degrees of Aries and Libra. Pluto's at 28 degrees of Capricorn. So that square that I said peaked in July, but influences all year, and then actually also influences like the decade behind us and the decade in front. So for every lunation that has happened all year, this setup between Pluto and the nodes has been fully in place. And after a time, Pluto will move on and the nodes will move on, and it won't be as exact, but it's certainly exact for this new moon. And this new moon is ruled by Pluto. Scorpio is ruled by Pluto. So the planet that owns the underworld is also the planet that invented death and rebirth. And now we're in a new moon, sun and moon and Mars, in the sign of death and rebirth. Now, we don't usually talk about releases in a new moon, but you have to be into some consideration right now of what else needs to die in order to be reborn more beautifully, fully, and powerfully. That needs to be part of your consideration today as we vibrate in this new moon. And then take that idea forward all week long. Make it a mantra this week. As the sun and Mars continue to trine Neptune, we are more directly connected to spirit, to our higher consciousness. And that question can be answered more readily each day of this week. What do I need to let die and release forever in order to have what I desire in my heart more readily? And let that be part of this new moon experience. Have at it, kids, because we all need all of us to be operating at the highest level of our consciousness if we want to make it through the next 5 years.
Did you know that Michael has a daily astro alert? If you enjoy hearing the weekly astrology, you might like knowing more about each day. When you subscribe for the daily astro alerts, you'll get an in-depth explanation of the day's astrology sent right to your email. Subscriptions are only $10 a month, or you can purchase the yearly subscription at the reduced price of $100. To subscribe, head over to michaellennox.com. All right, it's dream segment time. Every week, Dr. Michael will interpret dreams that are sent in via email or take a live caller. If you would like your dream interpreted on the podcast, you can go ahead and email us at dreams@michaellennox.com. Hopefully your dream will make it onto the show. This week we have an email and dream from Lindsay. Lindsay says, "Hi, Michael. I'm an avid listener and huge fan of the podcast. I first found you on TikTok."
Oh, yay.
Yeah. I recently had a dream that was dense in symbolism. And so, by the way, this is an old dream. So it's from December of 2022. So she says, this dream took place on December 7th, 2022. Coincidentally, the day after my first Pluto square Pluto transit ended. It's been a doozy for her. In the dream, I was in a storefront hiding from a storm outside, maybe a big thunderstorm or a tornado. There was threatening weather yet to come, and we were hunkered down in this store. We was myself and my current business partner, who's female. She seemed scattered and less concerned than me about the threatening weather. There was a store owner present, but they were more or less anonymous, and I never interacted with them. I was inside the store trying to clean up something that had fallen and broken on the floor. I was searching for a broom and dustpan to clean up the mess. Suddenly, 2 black jaguars were next to me. They were huge.
Ooh.
Yeah, they were huge, but appeared to be domesticated and gentle. They were cuddling with me in a way that felt safe and familiar, yet my instincts made me cautious, almost fearful of the big cats. I called out to my business partner for reassurance that they weren't going to rip my throat out, but she never responded to me, and I never received confirmation that the cats were not a threat. I did eventually find a broom in the back of the store in a closet space. There were many brooms to choose from, but the good one was tucked away in the back. Also, one of the jaguars was wearing a hat. It was floppy and patchworked, like a hippie hat from the 90s. And then, so she adds some context. For context, my business partner and I have been working together since the fall of 2020, and the entire year of 2022 has been a struggle for me to maintain the partnership. I've been very torn about whether to stay in this partnership and modify my obligations or to leave and move into my own independent business venture. Thank you so much for the work that you put out into the world."
Well, of course, the minute there's a black jaguars show up, I'm like, woohoo! Love this dream. Well, it's interesting. I'm so delighted that she shared that she's just coming out of Pluto square Pluto, because to me, the dream is reflecting issues of personal power. And that's what that transit is about. So there are 3 midlife crisis transits: Pluto square Pluto, Neptune square Neptune, and the Uranus opposition. Each one has a different meaning. The Uranus opposition is where we buy red sports cars because we want to feel free and young again. Neptune square Neptune is where we feel disillusioned about our lives. Does it have the meaning we used to have and hold? But the Pluto square Pluto crisis is all about personal power. And that Pluto is about power and authority. And we're all born into authority issues that are pre-installed, where we don't get to feel like the authority in our lives. Our parents are that. And And so we wind up creating psychic experiences. I don't mean like psychic, like clairvoyant. I mean like in our psyches, we push our own power into the basement a little bit. And some people have greater struggles in life about their disowned power where they think everybody else has the power. And Pluto square Pluto is designed to bring somebody through the kind of lessons that will result in somebody owning their own power. So I think, in fact, this power struggle dynamic from the Pluto square Pluto is in the dream, right? And I think it's reflecting this partner relationship. It's really interesting to me that there's, without even looking into the, details of how I might interpret some of these symbols, it's clearly a dream about conflict, right? Where the conflict is being expressed as weather. And it's just really interesting that who she's with is somebody who's not aware of the conflict.
Noted.
Right? So that, like right there, that gives me a view of how Lindsay is perceiving the partnership, that in the face of calamity, she's not experiencing, partnering. Yes. She's experiencing a disconnect. So if I think of Pluto square Pluto telling Lindsay she's got the power and she's at the end of the cycle, right? So that she's learned the lessons of whatever, that she even indicated it was a rough sort of year, that there's something about owning her power that would cause her to potentially make a choice to separate from a partner. Like when we feel disempowered, we might like to keep things as status quo. And it's a very empowered choice to end something because we got to face the unknown and the blank slate and all that stuff. We're even in some kind of business consciousness because we're in a storefront, right? Lindsay could find herself shoring up against the storm in any building. It happens to be a store. So that means there's a theme that we're in work consciousness, not private home consciousness. She offers two images for the storm, thunderstorm and tornado, which are very, very different. Yeah. But I love that she offered both because then we can look at the symbolic meaning behind them and why I call them different. First of all, a thunderstorm implies rain. Rain implies emotional expression or emotional content in dream symbolism. Now, there's also a lot of passion in a thunderstorm because you've got the visual of the lightning. Lightning is often a symbol for quick change, sudden change, right? Lightning strikes and something's different very fast. So between the lightning of sudden change, the rain indicating emotional content, and then the thunder that's always connected to lightning is like the big, passionate, like noise that's part of the conflict. But tornadoes are very specifically formed when two diverging energies meet up. And because they're both so different, they shove into each other in such a manner that causes a spin or a spiral. You have to have very high pressure and very low pressure bumping up against each other to create tornado conditions. Forgive me, I'm not I'm not a meteorologist, so I may be describing that a little inaccurately, but the theme is still the same, that in tornado, symbolism is two different energies force each other's hand and then turns into a destructive conflict. There's something interesting to me about the brooms, that there are many brooms to choose from and that the good one is sort of tucked in the back. So first of all, something obviously broke, right? So that's another perfect sort of reflection of we're in conflict. Something's broken and I have to fix it. That's pretty obvious, right? Something broke, she's going to get a broom. I think it's just really interesting that the good broom is tucked away in the back and there are all of these other not as effective brooms that have easier access. I'm going to assume that she can easily access the front brooms because the good one is tucked away in the back. I may be over projecting this, but that sounds to me to be like reflecting Lindsay's past efforts to clean up the messes that the struggle to stay or leave has been generating for Lindsay. If you think of each broken thing as a conflict moment, that in the past, Lindsay went to the closet, grabbed a broom, swept it up, but it wasn't a good broom, so it didn't work. Right? Again, I'm projecting this in. I'm having fun with the dream a little bit, but it's in there. Like, I'm not making up that the raw materials are in there for me to say this, but so I'll say it this way. If this were my dream, I would be perceiving of all of those other bad brooms as past attempts to clean up a mess. But tucked away in the back, if I find the good one, the one that's going to work, what happens next? The black jaguars appear. So that's why I make the connection between the ineffective brooms being the past and reaching for the good broom, which will solve this conflict, triggers the medicine that's necessary at this moment, black jaguars. Now, black jaguars, powerful spiritual animal and very much about conquering fear. Fear of the dark, fear of death, fear of the unseen, fear of the unknown. I think the domesticated sense of them and their gentleness means that Lindsay has direct access to them. That's certainly a power animal. And we keep talking about personal power, both with this dream and the Pluto square Pluto transit. Even the little hat the black jaguar is wearing sort of indicates a kind of accessibility that Lindsay has to this medicine. She's not at a place where the black jaguar comes in and she runs screaming because she's not ready to be that powerful. She is ready to be that powerful. There they are. So I think the dream is supporting the possibility of moving into radical change, making the change, even though that's frightening and scary, that Lindsay has the inner power to make the change vis-a-vis the black jaguars showing up and the actual broom that's gonna work.
Thank you for listening to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. You can find us on Apple Music, the iHeartRadio app, and anywhere you find your favorite shows. Head on over to michaellennox.com for information on astrology readings, the daily Astro Alert subscription, upcoming classes, and to join the mailing list.